This is History Now here on ONTV. I'm your host, Anthony Taormina, brother. I want to talk about the life and legacy of Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan is probably one of the most decorated superstars in professional wrestling. He helped bring professional wrestling to mainstream alongside promoter Vince McMahon. While he was a very successful professional wrestler, he also had a very controversial personal life, as we will get to as well. I want to talk first about prior to Hulk Hogan, we have to talk about Terry Bollea. Terry Bollea was born August 11th, 1953 in Augusta, Georgia. He attended Robinson High School in Tampa, Florida, where he played Little League Baseball beforehand. He began watching professional wrestling at the age of 16, which in your teen years, it's very common for fans to get interested in professional wrestling. As I eventually started getting showing interest in professional wrestling as early as 1997. So I was about 11 years old at that time. So, and we'll get to that when we talk about the Monday Night Wars in a little bit. He attended several wrestling shows in the Tampa area. One thing that I was surprised about with Hulk was he idolized the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. Now, Hogan and Rhodes would both be in the WWF years later, where Hogan was on the top of the card, Dusty was in the mid-cards, but Hulk really idolized the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, as did many stars. They idolized the American Dream. He also wanted to be like superstar Billy Graham. Now, if you look at a picture of superstar Billy Graham and Hulk Hogan, both of them are very, very similar. Both were bodybuilders, both were main eventers, and Hulk very much wanted to be like superstar Billy Graham. They developed a connection. They developed a bond. Hulk would call Billy Graham. So their body built were very, very similar between the Hulkster and the superstar. Prior to that, Terry was a bodybuilder and a musician. And Jack and Jerry Briscoe, if you've known the Briscoes, Jerry Briscoe in particular, present day fans, Jerry Briscoe was very much involved with the WWF back in the late 1990s. And fans asked why Jerry Briscoe was at Hogan's WWE tribute show that was recently. And this is why, because they attended one of his bodybuilding sessions and they asked Terry to try professional wrestling. And Terry would entertain it. He would be trained by Hiro Matsuda, Championship Wrestling from Florida. Mike Graham, who was the promoter at the time and was the son of the great Eddie Graham, was very reluctant to have him wrestle because he was so young. And Mike Graham eventually, with persuasion from the Briscoes, eventually relented. And it was his first real taste of professional wrestling. But Terry would struggle with it. And Matsuda was very, very stiff and was very, very hard-working on Terry. And as a result, Terry took a wrestling hiatus and managed an anchor club alongside his friend Whitey Bridges, and they developed a strong bond. It was here that Terry would meet a really close friend of his, Ed Leslie. In wrestling, he was known as Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Also in WCW, he would be wrestling as many characters, which was the Butcher, Zodiac, the Booty Man, and then later the Disciple. They trained together, and they eventually formed a tag team together. And Terry would ultimately convince Ed to get into professional wrestling. During this time, he earned a return to the ring, called Superstar Billy Graham, who was able to have connections. He wrestled in Alabama and was for a promoter, Louis Tillett. he convinced Leslie to join him, and they had a tag team where Terry would compete both as Sterling Golden and as Terry Boulder. And then later on, Terry and Ed would both wrestle for Jerry Jarrett in the Continental Wrestling Association. For those who don't know who Jerry Jarrett is, if you watch Jeff Jarrett perform, Jerry Jarrett is his dad. Okay? So, and Jerry Jarrett was a great promoter, promoted the Continental Wrestling Association, very well known in Memphis, Tennessee. So Terry Bollea would wrestle in Jerry Jarrett's company. Now, it would also happen where the name Hulk came from when Terry would appear at a talk show alongside Lou Ferrigno. Anyone who knows Lou Ferrigno, Lou Ferrigno was known as the Hulk. So, and they saw similar body types and similar, however, Terry had a stronger build than Lou. So, he wrestled as Terry the Hulk Boulder and would win his first professional wrestling championship in December of 1979 before dropping the title in 1980. Terry would also briefly wrestle in Georgia Championship Wrestling from September to December as Sterling Golden. And I believe Jake the Snake Roberts, his dad, was the owner of Georgia Championship Wrestling, Bill Watts. Or not his dad, no, but Bill Watts was the promoter for Georgia Championship Wrestling. Apologize there. I believe Cowboy Bill Watts was the promoter of Georgia Championship Wrestling. Terry would ultimately join the World Wrestling Federation in the Northeast Territory. At this time, wrestling was wrestling territories. The World Wrestling Federation at that time was in the Northeast. Terry would join for Vince McMahon Sr., who absolutely loved his charisma and introduced the name Hulk Hogan. He wanted a more Irish feel to him. So you would see him with the mustache, the blonde mustache. Originally, he wanted him to dye his hair red. However, Terry felt he could do more with the blonde hair look. So he kept the blonde hair look. He was paired with a villainous manager, Classy Freddie Blassie. So he was a villain, also known in wrestling terms as a heel. He feuded with Ted DiBiase and Andre the Giant. Both of them were baby faces, or good guys at the time. The famous showdown at Shea in 1980, when Hogan and Andre fought for the first time. Hogan also went for the WWF Championship for the first time, but lost to Bob Backlund, and would also go for the Intercontinental Championship, but would lose to Pedro Morales. In the 80s, he would split time between the WWF and New Japan Pro Wrestling. Now, he used very different techniques while he was in Japan and in the United States. In Japan, he used more technical wrestling holds compared to in the Americas, in the United States, where he used more power moves and the leg drop, which was his finishing maneuver. In Japan, he defeated Antonio Iaki, legendary Japanese wrestler, to win the International Wrestling Grand Prix Championship. However, he left the WWF to film the movie Rocky III, Thunder Lips. So that was his character. So if you hear longtime wrestling announcer and manager Bobby the Brain Heenan call Hogan Thunder Lips, this is where he gets it from. He initially joined the AWA under Verne Gagne, in August of 1981. He was initially a villain, but he became a face, a good guy, and he feuded with Jerry Blackwell, and then defeated him. And then his major big feud was with Nick Bockwinkel and manager Bobby the Brain Heenan. He would fight for the AWA title, only to lose those matches by disqualification. So basically heel tactics against the good guy wrestler. Gagne honestly did not want to put the title on Hogan, preferring to have the belt on technical wrestlers like Bockwinkel. And so that caused some frustration with Hulk. He was seen as the big baby face in the company and was not having the title be put on him. During this time, Hulk began using Hulkamania on May 15th, 1982 on the Johnny Carson show. So he was starting to go on these TV shows and was using Hulkamania. So Hulkamania Brothers, Running Wild on You. That started in 1982. He also debuted American Made in July 1983. So for those who when Hulk would go in WCW, he would use the term American Made. So, but Hulkamania is Running Wild on You was his main. He would leave the AWA in November 1983. And it caused some friction between Hogan and Gagne. But the reason why Hogan would leave is Vince McMahon. When we come back to History Now, we're going to talk about the Vince McMahon era here on History Now, here on ONTV.
On Sunday, August 3rd, Lake Orion's youngest ball players were invited to come out to Friendship Park for an afternoon of fun and practice during the Mayor's Play Ball event.
Woo! That was a heater.
So this is our second year partnering with Major League Baseball, MLB, the Detroit Tigers, and Orion Township to bring baseball to our community. And the goal of today and the goal of this partnership with MLB is to teach young people the love of America's pastime, the love of the game. So today's just a little intro, so we have some fun, some skills teaching, and a guest appearance by the world famous #1 mascot in America, Paws. So should be a real fun day. The kids are excited. The parents and adults are excited. I'm geeked, so that's what we're here for today.
Following an opening ceremony at Miracle Field, players were split into groups and led to one of 4 diamonds where they practiced skills like throwing, catching, and batting.
So we have some young experts from Lake Orion High School, some of our baseball and softball players. We have a local former pro player, Chris Newell, who was out last year, who's coming out again, and some others. So this is just, again, a fun day to teach kids about baseball.
As the event wound down, the Detroit Tigers' popular mascot, Paws, showed up to have fun with the kids and adults, posing for photos and goofing around on the field.
I mean, they're all getting a really cool, cute T-shirt that says MLB, but I hope I already see the smiles, and so it's already a W for me. That's it. And we're going to have ice cream, but again, the goal is for people to understand that this is a great sport, a great way to play, something you can play when you're young and you're old and watch the Tigers win on TV also.
Started in 2015, Major League Baseball and the United States Conference of Mayors joined forces to bring baseball to kids who might not have access to the sport. For more information, visit usmayors.org/playball. At Friendship Park, this is Joe Johnson reporting for ONTV News.
What you gonna do when History Now runs wild on you? Welcome back to History Now here on ONTV. I'm your host, Anthony Taormina, brother. All right, so let's talk about, at this point, Hulk Hogan's about to leave the AWA, and he's about to go on a new adventure to the World Wrestling Federation, and its promoter, Vince McMahon Jr. Vince wanted Hogan to be his top guy. He bought the company from his father, and Vince had this vision of wanting to take wrestling more mainstream. Now, prior to going more mainstream, wrestling was based off territories. So, and the National Wrestling Alliance was very, very powerful at that time. You had governing bodies. The National Wrestling Alliance determined who would be the champions, and the territories would have their champions, and the NWA would approve them. And as a result, the NWA had a lot of control, a lot of influence in the wrestling business. Vince's goal was to form one big entertainment company, so where other wrestling promotions would not be able to compete with Vince. and that included the National Wrestling Alliance. So Hulk returned to the WWF on December 27, 1983. On January 7, 1984, Hogan saved Bob Backlund from an attack from the Wild Samoans, who were heels at the time. And so Hogan was starting to become an official, full-fledged babyface. On January 23rd, 1984, wearing the red and the yellow, Hulk would defeat the Iron Sheik, managed by Classy Freddie Blassie, to win the World Wrestling Federation Heavyweight Championship. It is a championship that he held multiple times in his career. The birth, as Gorilla Monsoon would say, Hulkamania has officially arrived. It is here. The red and yellow, the training, the saying your prayers, eating your vitamins, ripping your shirt off, getting a crowd reaction, raising the ear, flexing the muscles. Okay, I have no muscles, I know. But Hulk was doing that. Most of his matches were often against strong heels. You think about One Man Gang, King Kong Bundy, Kamala, and Hogan would often deliver a steady offense at first, and then gets beaten up by the strong heel, seemingly near defeat, taking an opponent's finishing move. So he would take an opponent's finishing move, and then the referee would start counting 1, 2. Hulk would then kick out, and then begin hulking up, getting a second wind, feeding off the energy from the audience, as the opponent would try to beat him up with punching him in the face or the chest, but Hulk would not feel any pain. He would then feed off the energy. He would then hulk up, and then he points to his opponent, yells, "You!" Then he throws 3 punches. I'm a lefty, but he's a righty, so I'll go right-handed. And then he would do an Irish whip off the ropes. And he'd give his opponent the big boot. And then the leg drop. And then the victory to a screaming ovation from the crowd. This would happen very, very often in a lot of Hogan matches. While Hulk was not the most technical wrestler, he was one of the greatest entertainers in the business. He would always get a crowd reaction. However, and this would lead to some of the things with the Rock and Wrestling Connection on MTV. Hulk was the face of the Rock and Wrestling Connection. Vince McMahon was the promoter. The expansion of cable television and pay-per-views. Celebrities were coming in to Vince's programming. It led to the downfall of many regional wrestling promotions, and also it downgraded the National Wrestling Alliance to where they were only really working with one wrestling company, which was Jim Crockett Promotion, also later be known as WCW. And then the WWF would start buying up the territories and taking over territory, taking the top star, taking the stars, and many of those stars would end up competing for Vince McMahon. There were also many celebrities, Cyndi Lauper, Mr. T. Vince took a big gamble in March 31st, 1985, which was WrestleMania, the first ever WrestleMania. In that match, Hulk would team in the main event with Mr. T to take on Rowdy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Hogan would also use the song Real American as his theme song. In the WWF, Hogan would often come out to Real American, okay? And basically fight for your rights, fight for your right. And it was a proven success because WrestleMania was one of the big successes in the entertainment industry. Now, there were also some issues with Marvel. Hogan was not allowed to ever wear purple or green. So he stuck with wearing yellow and red. He could not say Hulk It had to be Hulk Hogan. Marvel would trademark Hulk Hogan, the Hulkster, and Hulkamania for up to 20 years. Marvel also received .9 of reportable gross merchandise revenue associated with Hogan, $100 for each of his matches, and 10% of Titan's portion of his other earnings under the name under his name, or 10% of earnings if Titan had no interest. This would continue even when Hogan was in WCW, but stopped in 1996 when Hogan changed personas, and we'll go over that in a little bit. Now, the Rock and wrestling connection was here. It would also lead to a show, a children's show called Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling. It was from September 14th, 1985 to October 18th, 1986, with reruns going until June 27th, 1987. Credit Wikipedia. Hulk Hogan was seen as the ultimate good guy, going against the ultimate bad guy, which was Rowdy Piper. And Rowdy Piper would have a group of villains, while Hogan would ally with a group of baby faces or faces or good guys. So it was a really, really big success. It had stars like Andre the Giant. It really got them over. And it was definitely for kids. Hogan was also involved into the Make-A-Wish Foundation, granting wishes to youngsters. He appeared on The Tonight Show. He was also the first and only wrestler to be on Sports Illustrated. And that's a lot of credit to both Terry Bollea, Hulk Hogan, and Vince McMahon, the promoter, who was promoting Hulk Hogan. And Hulk would go on the movies. He'd be in Rocky III. He would also have a movie No Holds Barred, which we'll get into in a little bit, with one of the stars from that movie actually fighting in the World Wrestling Federation. Hulk would have several rivalries with Rowdy Piper, the Macho Man Randy Savage, $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, Bobby the Brain Heenan, King Kong Bundy, Earthquake John Tenta. He would also have matches with others, the Nasty Boys Heart Foundation, the Big Boss Man Hakeem. And their matches would be very similar to what I mentioned in terms of Hogan delivers a steady offense, gets beaten up by the heel, takes the opponent's finishing maneuver, hulks up, points at his opponents, throws 3 punches, Irish whip, big boot, finish, then the leg drop, and then the victory. So, but his most famous one was in front of 93,000 people in March 29th, 1987, fighting Andre the Giant. Andre the Giant was being built as being undefeated and was paired with Bobby the Brain Heenan. Andre was 520 pounds at the time, and there was a lot of uncertainty because Hulk was thinking, what's the finish going to be? Based upon his interviews with WWF, Andre would not reveal it until when he got in the ring. Andre was very old school. Now, one of the big challenges was Hogan was going to body slam Andre. And being Andre 520 pounds, he tried to do it, but he couldn't lift him, so it ultimately would issue into back problems for Hulk. But Hogan tried again and successfully body slammed Andre the Giant. Andre ultimately passed the torch to Hulk. Hulk would main event first 9 WrestleManias, many of them for the World Championship. He would form the Mega Powers with the Macho Man Randy Savage alongside Miss Elizabeth, supporting Savage when he won the world title and feuded with DiBiase and Andre. Savage would turn on Hogan. They would fight for the title at WrestleMania 5, with Hogan winning. Hogan would then film No Holds Barred, which featured Tony Lister Jr., Zeus. Now, Zeus would come into the WWF and fight with Hogan, ultimately having a big SummerSlam 1988 match with Hogan and Brutus the Barber Beefcake, Ed Leslie, against the Macho Man Randy Savage, and Zeus, managed by Sensational Sherry Martel. Hogan in those feuds would win those matches. Excuse me. Also was a two-time Royal Rumble winner, winning both events in 1990 and 1991. At WrestleMania 6, he lost the title to the Ultimate Warrior, and it was seen as passing the torch to a younger wrestler. The Ultimate Warrior was a younger wrestler that Vince was high on and wanted Hogan to pass the torch. However, the Warrior was he was getting over, but not getting over well to the extent that Hogan was. So there was a big SummerSlam match with Earthquake, John Tenta. So Hogan was feuding with the Earthquake. There was a storyline where Hulk got injured by John Tenta, who was managed by Jimmy Hart. And so there was a lot of prayers, get well soon. There was fears that Hogan would never wrestle again. One of the biggest kayfabes in history, but fans believed it. Hulk ultimately would come back and he would take down the Earthquake. And as allies, Dino Bravo, often having help from the tugboat, which would be Typhoon, which we'll get to in time. The Warrior was feuding with the likes of the Macho King Randy Savage, who is now the Macho King, the Macho Man. But he wasn't getting over well to the extent that Hulk was. So the Warrior lost the title to Sergeant Slaughter with the help of Randy Savage and Sherry Martel. And Hogan won the 1991 Royal Rumble. So Hulk would feud with Sergeant Slaughter, who was seen as an Iraqi sympathizer. And that was going on during the time of Desert Storm in 1991. Well, the Iraq War ended, but Sergeant Slaughter still was going with the Iraqi storyline. And Hulk was fighting for the red, white, and blue. Hulk would win the WWF title again from Sergeant Slaughter at WrestleMania 7 in 1991. They would feud throughout 1991. Hulk would also feud with Ric Flair, who had just come from WCW. And so that was Flair's first big feud when he got into the WWF outside of Roddy Piper. He would lose the title to The Undertaker, but get the title back 6 days later. There was controversy with that too, and I'll get to that in a little bit. He would also feud with Sid Vicious in 1992, leaving after WrestleMania 8, but then he would return to the WWF in 1993, fighting in a tag match alongside Brutus Beefcake, fighting Ted DiBiase and Mike Rotunda, known as IRS, for the tag titles, but would ultimately lose that match by disqualification. But then at WrestleMania 9, Hogan would defeat Rodney Onawahi, known as Yokozuna, at WrestleMania 9 after Yokozuna won the title from Bret Hart. Yokozuna was seen as this Japanese sympathizer from Samoa, even though he is Samoan in real life, but was seen as this Japanese sumo star, managed by Mr. Fuji, a wrestling heel. Hogan, now there was some controversy about the Yokozuna decision, and I'll get with that in a minute. Ultimately, Yoko would win the title back from Hogan at King of the Ring 1993, and Hogan would lead the WWF in August of 1993. Now, there was some controversy during this time because the WWF was going in a different direction. There was some issues with the steroid scandal, which we'll get to. There was some controversy that Hogan was holding younger talent back, especially Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, even The Undertaker, with the focus being pointed to Hogan and his friends. Now, in the case of Bret Hart, Vince decided to go a different direction with, instead of going with bigger wrestlers, he went with smaller, more technical wrestlers like Bret Hart. Bret Hart he beat Ric Flair for the WWF Championship. He was defending it against all comers. He was giving other wrestlers an opportunity for the title, including a young Shawn Michaels. But Bret was really a fighting champion, and he worked hard, was on the road every night. And then here comes Hulk coming back to the company. Hulk wanted to win the WWF Championship. Hulk was this marquee star, but it caused a lot of friction with Bret Hart because Bret was seen as the guy that Bret was seen as as Vince's choice for the championship, but then here comes Hulk to steal the title. And Bret would hold that bitterness towards Hulk, and the decision was made to drop the belt to Yoko rather than having Hulk and Bret wrestle at SummerSlam in 1993, where Bret would go over, Hulk would pass the torch, and Bret would be the champion again. Hulk didn't want to do that. And it's caused some real-life friction between Bret Hart and Hulk Hogan, which still lasted to this day. We also were at the height of the Vince McMahon steroid scandal. Hogan denied using steroids. But in 1993, it was reported that Hulk was an avid steroid user. So in 1994, under immunity, Hogan testified for the prosecution against Vince McMahon. Hulk admitted that he used steroids, going back to 1976. But McMahon never provided him nor ordered him to take any steroids during the 1980s and the 1990s. This actually helped McMahon, who was ultimately acquitted on July 23rd, 1994. There was also the lack of a professional wrestling union, which led to friction between Hogan and Jesse the Body Ventura, who pushed for a wrestling union in the 1980s. Other than holding the younger talent back, there was issues with The Undertaker and Hogan. Undertaker tombstoned Hogan to a steel chair at Survivor Series 1991. Hogan alleged that The Undertaker injured his neck following the tombstone, which ended up being not true. Undertaker actually took good care of Hogan, and Hogan was really upset about taking that tombstone, and but it led to some controversy between Hogan and The Undertaker, and that feeling that Hulk was holding younger wrestlers back. So really, with The Undertaker, with Bret Hart, even with Shawn Michaels, it caused a lot of friction amongst the younger talent that Hulk was coming in and taking away opportunities from them. And that would be something that would haunt Hulk throughout his entire career. Now, when we get back to History Now, we're going to talk about Hogan's WCW days, brother, here on History Now on ONTV.
On Tuesday, August 5th, representatives of the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, or SEMCOG, visited Orion Township Hall for a very special check presentation. Each year, SEMCOG distributes $10 million in federal funding as part of its Transportation Alternatives program. This year, Orion Township was selected to receive almost $826,000 to construct a safety path along Mabee Road.
It allows us to build this connector pathway, 860-foot boardwalk across the wetlands on Mabee Road, and we've been looking to add this connector for a very, very long time. Very expensive project, so we're excited.
This is coming from a specific bucket of money. I talk about buckets of money all the time that needs to be used for transportation alternatives. So I've already had residents saying we could use that money to fix roads. That's a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But this money, the TAP program, is specific for these types of walking and biking types of projects. So we are thrilled that SEMCOG agreed the importance of this crucial connection. It's not just for Orion residents. It connects us to Independence and downtown Clarkson, and there's a giant trail network to our west, and to those folks from the west to come visit us in our downtown and hit our trails. So it's amazing. And like I said a few minutes ago, I've run into a couple residents that live in that area that say, you know, that is a paved road. The pavement condition is wonderful, and cars go very quick down that road. So It's a huge win for our community, a safe place, and it will be beautiful. That's the other thing. It's going to be a gorgeous place to take pictures. There'll be some benches, so even if you're not an avid biker or runner, you can still walk there and enjoy nature. We're really excited.
The proposed project is similar to the boardwalk that was constructed along Clarkston Road near Camp Agawam and the Van Tassel Bridge near Clarkston and Kern Road, which was the township's first project funded by SEMCOG's TAP grant.
Well, the mission of SEMCOG includes that we have a connected, thriving region, and by being connected, there's a lot of ways to be connected, but having pathways across the entire region that connect to regional trail systems is one element of that. So that helps, what you're doing in Orion Township helps meet the need of what we're trying to achieve as a region.
So what's the timeline on this project? When do you hope to get started, and how long will it take?
So the process has already started. We've already authorized our engineers to start the work. We have soil borings already starting. Ideally, it would be 26 before construction, and probably final wrap up by 27.
SEMCOG is already accepting applications for fiscal year 2026 through 2029. For more information on TAP grants, visit semcog.org. At Township Hall, this is Joe Johnson reporting for ONTV News.
Welcome back to History Now here on ONTV, brother. I'm Anthony Taormina, the host of History Now, co-host of Between Taorminas. And while we were on the break, I just got a report that my co-host on Between Taorminas, Ian Weatherspoon, and his family had a baby boy. Congratulations, Ian. Well deserved. Really, really happy for you. Congratulations on behalf of not just me and my brother, Sam, but from all of us at ONTV. Congratulations, Ian. Well deserved. All right, so I want to go with turning to history now, talking about Hulk Hogan's days joining another company, World Championship Wrestling, WCW. Hulk at that time was filming Thunder in Paradise, and he was ultimately approached by Ric Flair and Eric Bischoff if he wanted to come into WCW. Hulk ultimately agreed to come in with the condition that he feud with his first feud being with Ric Flair. So Flair at that time was a babyface, and Flair was forced to turn into a bad guy, beating Sting for the WCW, ultimately for the unifying the WCW World and International Championships, and associating himself with Sherry Martel, who had also just come in and ultimately allied at first with Sting, but then turned on him and joined Flair. Now, Hogan kept his red and yellow persona. He kept his colors, brother. He's yellow and red. However, in his contract, he had a creative control clause which could dictate finishes, which he had the ability to decide what was best for his character, whether he wanted to win a match or whether he wanted to lose a match. This was the first because creative control was never really mentioned in wrestling, where a wrestler could dictate his or her own finishes. This is where it really started with having the ability to dictate finishes. And this will be important because, as we mentioned with the Flair storyline, we'll go over how he allegedly used his creative control clause in his contracts. He also brought a lot of friends with him to WCW. Hogan at that time, Hogan was always uncomfortable wrestling certain wrestlers. So a lot of his friends came with him, and Hogan would feel very comfortable wrestling with a lot of his friends. We would see Brutus Beefcake join him in WCW. The Nasty Boys were already in WCW a little bit prior to Hulk coming in, but they were very close, Knobs and Sags. Jimmy Hart was his manager. He ultimately joined with Hulk as his manager. So in late 1993, when Hulk was feuding with Yokozuna, Jimmy Hart was his manager. There was a lot of controversy there because why did Hulk need a manager? He really, when he always handled things on his own. John Tenta came in, Sherry Martel, would come in. Other wrestlers like Kamala would join at times. Hacksaw Jim Duggan would come into WCW, largely because of Hulk. And also later on, the Macho Man Randy Savage would join WCW. Celebrities were being brought in. Shaquille O'Neal came in. Mr. T came in. Catering was brought in. When Hogan brought a lot of his friends with him, it caused a lot of controversy because at that time you were having stars like Cactus Jack, better known as Mick Foley, Stunning Steve Austin, who would become Stone Cold Steve Austin, Dustin Rhodes, who many know as Goldust, and also was the son of Dusty Rhodes, Johnny B. Bad, who was also known as Mark Merrow, a young Hunter Hearst Helmsley. These were younger stars that were in WCW before leaving for the WWF. And part of that was Hogan came in. Hogan brought in a lot of his friends, and they joined up with him in WCW. He rekindled his rivalry with Ric Flair and defeated him at the Bash at the Beach for the WCW World title on July 17, 1994. Now, the initial plan, according to Ric Flair's book, was for Hogan to win the title at Bash at the Beach. Flair was to get his revenge at Clash of the Champions in September and win the belt, and for Hogan to get it back at Halloween Havoc in October. But Hogan did not want to do it. His reasonings for it was he didn't want to lose the title that quickly. So at Clash of Champions, there was a disqualification finish where Arn Anderson, better known as the Masked Man and Ric Flair's closest friend, interfered for Flair and beat up Hogan, and it caused a disqualification finish. Also, there were certain stars who did not want to work with Hulk and vice versa. Rick Rude was one. They had worked together during the WWF days, and Hulk ended up winning those matches and didn't want to. And it caused a lot of bitterness with Rick Rude, who was a really good technical wrestler and really good, and he was really a really good technical wrestler and did not want to work with Hulk. And then Vader, Leon White, who was the big star in WCW. He was a WCW world champion, really big monster heel in 1993, managed by Harley Race, longtime wrestler and manager. And neither of them did not want to work with Hulk. And neither of them didn't want to take the fall for Hulk. So Flair had to play peacemaker. Excuse me. And it caused a lot of controversy because, again, Hogan had creative control. And Vader wanted to go over on Hulk, but Hogan wouldn't do it because of the creative control clause. So, but Hogan would ultimately feud with Vader, and but there would be no pinfall finishes, or Flair would intervene and on Vader's behalf. And but because Vader and Hulk did not want to work together, they neither wanted to take the fall for the other because Vader was concerned of his character, Hulk was concerned for his character, keeping it strong. So Flair would intervene and take the finishes on Vader's behalf. Hulk would also feud with the Dungeon of Doom, Kevin Sullivan's group. Many of Hulk's friends, Ed Leslie, John Tenta, Kamala, were part of that group, so Hulk felt very comfortable wrestling his friends. At Starrcade 1994 was seen as one of the worst wrestling events of the year. That was main evented by Hulk Hogan wrestling Ed Leslie, who was known as the Butcher at the time. But Hulk felt really comfortable wrestling his friends. And a lot of that was executive producer Eric Bischoff and Hulk working together. Bischoff gave Hulk a lot of influence, a lot of creative control over his character. And but it developed a tight bond between Hulk and Eric, which remained extremely strong even to this day. Hogan also brought in a young wrestler named Paul White, who many wrestlers would know as the Giant or the Big Show. Initially, he was viewed as Andre the Giant's son, but ultimately they phased that out, and the Giant would go on to have a really successful career of his own. And Hulk was also feuding with Lex Luger, who had just come back from the WWF to WCW, was partnering up with Sting, still continued his rivalry with Flair and the Four Horsemen, often allying with his Mega Powers partner Randy Savage. And they would ultimately defeat, one match they would have where Hulk and Randy would defeat the big heel group of villains, Flair, Arn Anderson, and the Dungeon of Doom, in a cage match at Uncensored in 1996. It really didn't make any sense, but it happened. And it was like 2 on 8. It was like the Alliance and Hulkamania. And it ended up, Hogan and Randy and Savage won the match. So, but Hogan's character was getting stale at that time. A lot of WCW fans resented Hogan coming in there. He was seen as a WWF guy. He had brought his friends in. It caused a lot of resentment. WCW was seen as a Southern, priority Southern wrestling audience, and it did not like how Hogan was coming in, getting all these, never putting a wrestler over, taking a pin, anything like that. Hulk simply refused to lose matches, and it caused a lot of friction. But Hulk also knew his character was getting stale. The red and yellow was getting stale, so he needed to reinvent himself. Henceforth, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash both came in from the WWF to WCW. They were causing ruckuses all over WCW events, calling themselves the Outsiders. On July 7, 1996, in a 6-man tag team match that involved Savage, Sting, and Luger, Hogan came in and turned on the Macho Man Randy Savage, joining Hall and Nash, and they became the NWO, the New World Order. Hulk would grow a black beard to go with his traditional blonde hair and mustache, wore the NWO black and white with lightning bolts. He bashed fans, spray painted unconscious wrestlers with spray paint. He would badmouth announcers like Mean Gene Okerlund, longtime announcer in both the WWF and WCW. And but his character as a villain was getting over. Hall and Nash were these outsider villains. Their goal was to take over WCW. And it was getting over. He won the WCW title at Road Wild against the Giant. And Hogan would ultimately spray paint the belt. He feuded with the Giant. Now, the Giant would ultimately join the NWO in September 96 through December of 96. Macho Man Randy Savage, who would also join the NWO from February 97 to May 1998. Rowdy Roddy Piper, who came in Halloween Havoc in October of 1996. After Hogan defeated Savage, Piper came in and was Hogan's next big challenger. They used a storyline where Piper was saying that Hogan could never truly defeat him, that Piper had always defeated Hogan, which wasn't true. Hulk had defeated Piper in matches in 1985, but they were never, quote, clean or never fair. But Hogan would defeat Piper clean in those WWF events. Also feud with Luger. Diamond Dallas Page, who was getting over in 1997. And also Sting. He would ultimately lose the title. He would hold the title until December 1997, with the exception of 1 week where he lost the title to Luger prior to Road Wild in 1997, where Luger won the title over Hulk in a clean match in Detroit, despite attempted NWO interference. But it was more constant where the NWO would interfere in Hogan's and Hall and Nash's matches and ultimately beat up and spray paint unconscious WCW wrestlers, whether it be Luger, the Giant, the Steiner brothers, Ray Traylor, all fell victim to the spray painting tactics of Hogan and the NWO. But they were also getting popular. The NWO was being seen as cool heels because their merchandise was going up. Even today, you see NWO shirts still being worn to this day. It was a very big merchandising success. And a lot of that could be related to Hulk Hogan turning bad, turning as a heel, and becoming Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Now, in December of '98, Hogan would lose the title to Sting, Steve Borden. Though it was very controversial because at that time, Hulk did not want to put Sting over clean. So there was a decision where a fast count was made. Bret Hart, who was in WWF for a long, long time, jumped ship to WCW, basically said, no, I'm not going to let this happen again. This was the base of the Montreal Screwjob. And the match was restarted. Sting beat Hogan for the title. And but there was never that clean win, despite having a fabulous build between Hogan and Sting, where Sting was seen as the ultimate good guy. He reverted into the Crow gimmick, and wrote ultimately the ultimate battle of good versus evil. Sting was seen as the savior of WCW, would defeat Hogan, and ultimately win the WCW title. It just wasn't seen that way because Nick Patrick, the referee, made a calm count rather than a quick count. And there just was a lot of controversy, and it could have been... WCW was building from '96 when Hulk turned heel to Hollywood Hogan, and Sting was seen as this ultimate good guy. And it just didn't work out that way because Hulk did not want to put Sting over clean. And that caused a little bit of upsetness between Hulk and Sting, but Hulk had creative control. So in 1998, Hulk would ally with Eric Bischoff, continue to ally with Bischoff, who had joined the NWO in '96. He would win the title on and off. He won the title from Savage on April 20th, but would lose it to Bill Goldberg on July 6, 1998 at the Georgia Dome. Goldberg was seen as this big star, and WCW was trying to get him over. Hulk decided what way to get him over than to beat him for the title, beat him clean, so Goldberg would have this run as the WCW champion until Starrcade in 1998, where he lost it to Kevin Nash. Now, Nash would lose the title back to Hogan on January 4th, 1999, in a farce match, better known as the Finger Poke of Doom. And at this time, there was the Monday Night Wars going on between WCW and the WWF. Mick Foley, who would wrestle as Cactus Jack and Dude Love and Mankind, won the world title from The Rock. And it was a very big deal because Mick Foley was a clear-cut, blue-collared, hard-working wrestler. And but the thing was, the WWF was taped, and Eric Bischoff had Tony Schiavone, the announcer WCW, release the results of the WWF show. WCW was releasing WWF finishes because the WWF was taped, WCW was live. But what happened was, viewers watched the WWF product, they tuned out of the WCW product and watched WWF. And it resulted in a big ratings boom for the WWF. The WWF would have 5.9 rating that night, while WCW would have 5.0 rating. And during the Monday Night Wars, during Hogan had the heel turn, WCW was beating the WWF for 82 straight weeks. And part of that, big reason for that, was Hollywood Hogan in the NWO. So WCW ultimately suffered, as a result, these false finishes, constant disqualification finishes. It was getting like the same old predictability, whereas whereas in '96 WCW was being the more unpredictable, WWF was being a little more predictable. It caused the WWF to go into the Attitude Era where it was very hard hitting, swearing was more. You see more of sex and all that type of things. WWF was going more cutting edge. In 1997, you see Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Goldust. The Undertaker was changing his character. You see Kane coming in. The Three Faces of Foley. You see Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Triple H coming in, or becoming Triple H, more of a edgier character. Shawn Michaels was getting more edgier as well. So you see WWF's going more of an edgier product, whereas WCW trying to counteract WCW, but WCW is having the same old predictable finishes, and as a result, it caused fans to tune to the WWF. With the WWF, WCW, and to a lesser extent ECW, the Monday Night Wars was one of the most successful eras from between 1996 to about 1999, 2000. Fans were watching wrestling. They were challenging Monday Night Football in terms of ratings, both WCW and the WWF. And a lot of that credit should go to the NWO and Hulk Hogan's heel turn into the evil Hollywood Hogan, the Black. Now, in his later years in WCW, Hogan would win the WCW title 2 more times. His nephew Horace Hogan would join. Also, Mike Awesome was also related to the Hogan family. But injuries were taking its toll on Hulk. You had the knee injuries and the hip replacements. Hulk would get injured with his knee. Hulk returned as a babyface in 1999. He returned in his yellow and red colors. One of my favorite yellow and red feuds was with Kevin Nash in 1999, where they actually had the match at Road Wild in Sturgis. Hulk would win a, quote, retirement match over Nash. And he would also feud with Nash, Sting, Luger, and Flair from 99 to early 2000. Wrestlers he was familiar with that he knew that would take care of him in his wrestling character. So there was also backstage politics in WCW. Vince Russo was pushing younger wrestlers over older veterans. Hogan was reluctant to work with younger wrestlers. He preferred his friends, preferred other wrestling veterans. There was an interview from Eric Bischoff that Hulk did not want to work with Billy Kidman, who was a great technical wrestler, but the problem was Kidman was a much smaller wrestler than Hulk, and Hulk was not sure if Kidman could get heat over Hulk because Hulk was a bigger character and was a well-known name, and so Hulk was very protective of his character, and it caused friction with Vince Russo, who was pushing younger wrestlers over older veterans. It cultivated in the Bash of the Beach Jeff Jarrett, who was a veteran, but is also the WCW champion, laid down for Hogan. Russo wanted Jarrett to go over, but Hogan didn't want that. Hogan used his creative control card. The planned finish was for Jarrett to lay down. Hogan was to win the title, bash Russo, and walk out before returning in October to feud with Booker T for the undisputed WCW title. Russo made it a shoot, bashed Hogan, and said Hogan would never wrestle in WCW again. Russo throughout claimed it was all work. However, Hogan and Bischoff both claimed it was a shoot. It caused Hogan to file for defamation of character in 2002, which was settled out of court. Hogan would get knee surgery on both his knees. He had a test run in Jimmy Hart's Excitement Wrestling Federation, where wrestled Curt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, and it was proven he could still go. WCW would be sold to WWF in February 2001. Now, Hogan would eventually make a return to the WWF when we return to History Now here on ONTV.
It's not every day you get to climb inside a fire truck, sit behind the wheel of a bulldozer, or honk the horn of a semi. But at Lake Orion's Big Rig Gig, that's exactly what families came out to do.
I'm here at Friendship Park where the attention is less on the slides, but more on the rides.
From tractors to fire trucks, big rides to small rides, almost alive to definitely alive, to real and to fake. The Big Rig Gig gave kids plenty of choices where to honk horns, climb inside, or meet the driver.
Great to see all the community come out here, especially the young kids that come out to check out all the different vehicles. It shows the community that what a vehicle looks like, and especially the young kids, so you can see that the police vehicles out there helping the community.
The event was free to all families, giving every kid the rare chance to climb inside their favorite vehicles.
Oh, I just hope it brings everybody out and makes them excited about the fire department. We have some brochures and some literature to hand out. I just hope it helps everybody at home. Oh, that's the best part. That's the best part. Every little kid wants to see a fire truck. They like seeing us go down the road, maybe in their neighborhoods, but then now they can actually come up and they can see the trucks, get in them, touch them, do that kind of thing.
The Big Rig Gig has no signs of slowing down and draws in a crowd for a free, family-filled night of fun. Lyndon Potter, ONTV News.
Welcome back to History Now here on ONTV, brother. I'm Anthony Taormina, host of History Now, co-host of Between Taorminas here on ONTV. I want to talk about Hulk Hogan in his second return to the WWE or WWF in 2002-2003. Hogan initially returned to the WWF as a heel in his black and white persona alongside Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. He returned in the NWO black and white look. They had feud with Stone Cold Steve Austin, cost him the WWF title at No Way Out in 2002, and spray painted his back NWO. Hulk would have his own feud. Under the Hollywood Hogan persona, would feud with The Rock, who was seen as the second face in the company behind Stone Cold Steve Austin. They attacked, spray painted Rock's back. They ran him over with a semi while The Rock was in an ambulance. Very, very memorable segment where the match at WrestleMania 18 was made between The Rock and Hollywood Hulk Hogan. But Hogan had to get heat. He was a heel. He was a villain. So what better way to get heel than heat than to run someone over in a semi while someone was in an ambulance. Hogan and The Rock fought at WrestleMania 18, March 17, 2002. The Rock won the match despite Hogan was getting cheers in Toronto. And a lot of that had to do with the respect that Hogan had fighting the Ultimate Warrior and the respect that fans had for Hulk, as Hulk always got a babyface reaction whether he was a face or a heel in Toronto. And that was the respect that Hulk had gotten from the fans. So Hulk, after the match, turned on Hall and Nash and allied with The Rock. Now, he would wear the black and the white for a few weeks before returning to the yellow and red persona with a twist. He kept the beard, the NWO beard, and was still going under Hollywood Hulk Hogan. So he had all three colors going at the same time. He defeated Triple H, who was the champion for the WWE Undisputed Championship in April, becoming the last ever WWF champion before the WWF changed their name to World Wrestling Entertainment, and the first ever WWE champion before losing to Hulk's old rival, The Undertaker, at Judgment Day in May 19th, 2002, where instead of the tombstone, The Undertaker chokeslammed Hogan and also had help from Vince McMahon. And there was a little bit of reluctancy, but The Undertaker was a professional. And if you watch The Undertaker's chokeslam to Hulk, Hulk sold the chokeslam, did not sell it well at all. And it was really, really a slow-paced wrestling match where The Undertaker did a lot of selling, and Undertaker ultimately won the match. Hulk would feud with another American hero, Kurt Angle, over who the real American was. Hulk was when they fought at King of the Ring, and Hogan lost by submission for the first time in his career. He tapped out to Kurt Angle's ankle lock, giving the rub to Kurt Angle. But Hulk would team with Adam Copeland, Edge, ultimately, to win the WWE Tag Team titles for the first time over Billy Gunn and Chuck Palumbo, but lost it to Lance Storm and Christian on July 21st. Fought Brock Lesnar. He recently made a return to WWE programming on August 8th, 2002, and again lost by submission. So Hogan, again, giving the rub to another younger star, because Hulk was slowly starting to put over younger talent. Hogan went on a hiatus. He returned in 2003 in a losing effort against The Rock before fighting Vince McMahon and beating Vince McMahon in a street fight at WrestleMania 19. In that match, Rowdy Roddy Piper intervened and tried to help Mr. McMahon. But Hogan won the match. McMahon would cape-face fire Hogan, and Hulk would return as a masked man known as Mr. America. He would feud with McMahon and Piper throughout the early to mid-2003s, but ultimately would quit WWE due to a pay dispute. He made appearances in other promotions, including Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, TNA, before the WWE inducted him into their Hall of Fame in 2005. Hogan returned to the WWE, aiding Nick Dinsmore, better known as Eugene, at WrestleMania 21 on April 3rd, 2025. And then would team with Shawn Michaels against Muhammad Hassan and Daivari, defeating them at Backlash May 3rd. Michaels would turn on Hogan after a tag match against Angle and Carlito on July 4th, and then fought each other, Hogan and Michaels fought at SummerSlam on August 21st. This was also supposed to be a 3-series match, with Hogan winning the first one, then Michaels getting his revenge before Hogan winning the final one, like what happened with Flair in 1994. Hogan didn't want to do it, and it caused bitterness with Shawn. If you've watched that match in SummerSlam 2006, Shawn would often oversell Hulk during their matches. So Hulk would give Shawn a move, and Shawn would oversell it. And it was Shawn's way of indirectly saying that he wasn't happy with the way that he did business with Hulk. And Hulk would ultimately win the match. Shawn would give Hulk a handshake and ultimately turn face, or turn good guy again, while Hogan would once again go on a hiatus. But as I made mention to, with the bitterness over the younger wrestlers, there was still some bitterness there too, between Shawn Michaels and Hulk Hogan. Hulk would have one more match against Randy Orton at SummerSlam 2006 on August 20th, which he won clean before leaving the WWE again in 2007. After leaving the WWE, Hulk would defeat Paul White in a Memphis match before focusing on other adventures, basically his family life, and focusing on Hogan Knows Best. Hogan was also doing Hogan's Knows Best with his family, his wife Linda at the time. They married from 1983 to 2009. His daughter and singer Brooke Hogan, who was born in 1988, and their son Nick, who was born in 1990. It ultimately would be replaced by Brooke Knows Best when Brooke moved out, but Hulk was featured heavily in that. Explored a lot of the Hogan family life. Hulk Knows Best, however, was canceled when it was revealed that Nick was involved in a car crash that paralyzed his friend John Granziano, who is today in a nursing home. Also, it was revealed that Hulk had cheated on Linda with a friend of Brooks. The friend was 21 years younger than Hulk. Linda would file for divorce on November 24th, 2007, and ultimately would date a friend of Nick's, who was 19 at the time. Today, Linda is not married, to my knowledge. Hulk would begin a relationship with Jennifer McDaniel in 2008. They engaged in 2009 and married in December 10th, 2010. They would divorce 12 years later. There was still some bitterness, a lot of bitterness between Hulk and Linda. Linda and Hulk wanted nothing to do with her. Linda would often say negative things about Terry, and but Terry stayed a very good father to Brooke and to Nick, despite what was happening between Hulk and Linda. Brooke would side with her father. Nick kind of stayed neutral through it all, wanting a relationship with both his mother and his father. But it would cause bitterness between Linda and Brooke. And to this day, Brooke does not talk with Linda, or Brooke would distance from Hulk in 2023 after Hulk was going a different road and Brooke didn't want to be a part of that. And but Brooke always loved Hulk. Hulk always loved Brooke, and they just couldn't get together after 2023, but they still loved and cared for each other, despite Brooke having to. We'll get to that eventually. Now back to Hulk would ultimately marry again in September 2023, marrying Sky Daly. Brooke did not want Hulk to marry Sky. She wanted them to be friends, but ultimately Hulk would marry Sky, and it caused a lot of tension between Hulk and Brooke. Brooke and Jennifer McDaniel were both very protective of Hulk at that time too, being there for Hulk during his times of surgeries, during his time of trying to help him through a lot of his schedules, and they were both very protective of Hulk, and Hulk would also become a born-again Christian on December 20, 2023. Well, long being a Christian since birth, he struggled with infidelity, cheating on people, making some really bad decisions. So in 2023, he devoted his life again towards Christ and had been there since the end of his life. In 2009, alongside Eric Bischoff, Hulk would join Dixie Carter in TNA. During this time, which I really enjoyed, I enjoyed hearing about the Hulkamania tour in Australia, where Hulk, and he had several former WWE superstars like The Godfather, Charles Wright, Rikishi, Brian Christopher, and then also bringing Ric Flair out of retirement. Ric Flair was struggling with financial problems, and Hulk helped Ric out. Hulk would fight Ric in the main events of these shows. Ric would often be accompanied by Lady Lacey Von Erich, part of the famous Von Erich family. And during those times, several of the stars on the tour, excuse me, Ric Flair, Orlando Jordan, the Nasty Boys, Lacey Von Erich, Ken Anderson, would join TNA alongside Hulk. So if you remember with WCW, all these stars would come join in TNA. There was some bitterness among the established stars in TNA. Jeff Jarrett was not happy. AJ Styles was not happy. Beer Money. There was a lot of, because Hulk was bringing in his friends again into TNA, and it caused a lot of concern, a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of just uncomfortableness. So in TNA, Hulk and Eric changed the 6-side TNA ring to regular wrestling ring, giving his friends opportunity. Other stars like Jeff Hardy, Scott Hall, Sean Waltman, Rob Van Dam, and others would also join TNA. It also would cause the established stars to essentially lose their spots in the main event roster, or work in the mid-card, or be... there was also less emphasis on the X division, which was seen as WCW's cruiserweight division. There was a lot of similarities, so there was kind of the the X division was kind of not getting put into sort of the way it should, because the X division made, like the six-sided ring, the X division made TNA unique, which was cruiserweights, younger wrestlers that were these high-flying matches, and it caused a lot of controversy from TNA fans. So Hulk also took Chris Park's Abyss under his wing. Would team with Abyss to defeat Flair and AJ Styles in a tag match on March 8th. He also managed a team of Jeff Jarrett, Rob Van Dam, Jeff Hardy, and Abyss to defeat Ric Flair's team of Sting, Desmond Wolfe, James Storm, and Robert Roode. He played the role of the face general manager in TNA, often going against Flair, but also was going against Sting and Kevin Nash, who were suspicious of Hogan's motives. Until then, Abyss ultimately turned on Hulk, prophesying the word they. It was revealed at Bound for Glory on December 10th in Daytona Beach, which was the same place where Hogan turned heel in WCW, that Hogan and Eric were behind a group that consisted of Jeff Hardy, Jeff Jarrett, and Abyss, while giving Hardy the TNA Championship. Ric Flair and his group Fortune would also join the group as well. They formed the group known as Immortal. Hogan, however, was sidelined. He underwent a potential career-ending spinal surgery on December 21st. Hogan would return as a heel sole owner of TNA on March 3rd, 2011, and wrestle one final time, losing to Sting at Bound for Glory, then turning into a good guy in the process. In this process, Hulk, for the rest of his career, would be a good guy general manager until October 13, 2013, when his contract with TNA expired. Hulk would wear both yellow and red along with black. Now, Hulk was also dealing with some controversies in his personal life as well. In the Gawker lawsuit. In October 2012, Gawker released part of a sex tape that was released between Hogan and the ex-wife of Bubba the Love Sponge, Charlotte Helm with her name, in April of 2012. It forced Hogan to first, though it was confirmed that from Brooke that Bubba did not send the tape. Bubba the Love Sponge was one of Hogan's really close friends. And this tape caused friction between Hulk and Bubba. And it was revealed through Brooke that Bubba did not send the tape. One of his ex-employees related to Charlotte Helm, who was his ex-wife, took it from him. And but it caused friction between Hulk and Bubba. Hogan filed a lawsuit against Bubba and his ex-wife, which was ultimately settled in September. Bubba struggled with the guilt of being involved with that tape. And in reality, it wasn't Bubba's fault. One of his ex-employees took the tape from Bubba and ultimately sent it to Gawker, and Gawker released the tape. But Bubba struggled with that guilt, and ultimately Bubba would be vindicated, and Hulk knew that Bubba didn't send it. In December, a federal court found that Gawker did not violate U.S. copyright law, which was a brief temporary victory for Gawker. Hogan then filed another lawsuit for invasion of privacy and intentional infliction of distress, and seeked $100 million from Gawker and also Charlotte Helm. Hogan would win the case for $115 million in March 18, 2016, had access to the editor-in-chief's files of Gawker, and in November, an out-of-court settlement resulted in $31 more million for the Hulkster. Gawker would be forced to file for bankruptcy and hasn't been the same since. In 2014, when Hulk would return to the WWF, racism allegations from the sex tape would damage Hogan's credibility, would damage Hulk's credibility as well. Hulk had been making appearances for the WWE prior to, and when the racism part of the tape came out, It caused WWE to not even want to do any business with Hulk. He terminated his contract. Hogan's merchandise was taken down. It caused considerable damage to his legacy. He did offer an apology, but not everyone accepted it. Even to this day, there's a lot of bitterness saying Hulk's a racist. Hulk is very, but it did cause considerable damage to his legacy, both the sex tape and the racism allegations that came out because of it. Hulk would return to WWE in 2018, hosting WWE's Crown Jewel event in Saudi Arabia, and then in 2019 honoring his longtime friend Mean Gene Okerlund, who had passed away. Hulk would be also inducted in the 2019 Hall of Fame alongside Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and Sean Waltman for the NWO part of his career as Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Hulk made his final WWE appearance in January of 2025 alongside Jimmy Hart promoting his Real American beer. The crowd, however, mostly booed Hulk, mostly over his past racist comments. And there were also, Hulk made it open that he endorsed President Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention. This was controversial too, because Hulk was very, very popular with many, but then he had never went political. Then he endorsed President Donald Trump. Half of the country loved him for it, half did not. But Hulk openly revealed he was a Republican and openly endorsed Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention. Donald Trump was a friend in the wrestling business. He allowed WWF, Vince McMahon, to host WrestleMania 4 and WrestleMania 5 at Trump Plaza in New Jersey. Him and Vince McMahon had a match in November at WrestleMania in 2008, 2009. He won the. But Trump has remained very close to the McMahon family and was also very close with Hulk as well. But several people in the crowd booed Hulk. One was over the political views, and then also his past racist comments over the sex tape. But Hulk endorsed President Trump, and President Trump won the election in 2024. But Hulk's health was also deteriorating. He had had multiple surgeries. It had taken its toll on his body. He was experiencing irregular heartbeats. It was said that he was also suffering low-end leukemia. There's been controversies because when Hulk passed, there had been no autopsy. There was no, and I would recommend watching Bubba the Love Sponge's views on this, because he revealed some really strong questions about what had happened when Hulk passed. And also, Hulk was keeping a busy schedule, still stayed really close with Eric Bischoff and Jimmy Hart. As I said, he had that falling out with Brooke in 2023. Hulk tried to mend fences. He kept in touch with Brooke's husband. And so Hulk was really trying to mend fences with his family, not with Linda, but particularly with Brooke, more toward the end of his life. Hulk would die on July 24th, 2025 in Clearwater at the age of 71 from a heart attack. He was 71 years old. He was cremated August 5th. It was honored with several wrestlers and celebrities attending, including Triple H, Vince McMahon, Kevin Nash, Stephanie McMahon, Ric Flair. And Vince McMahon released a Twitter post celebrating the life of Hulk Hogan. Other wrestling stars released tributes to Hogan. Ric Flair, his tribute to Hogan was very, very special. Vince McMahon at the at this ceremony, the private ceremony, encouraged fans and celebrities to give a standing ovation to Hulk and his legacy. Kid Rock was at the ceremony. Trump posted several tributes to Hulk. We look back at the controversies of Terry Bollea and the wrestling legacy of Hulk Hogan. Terry Bollea, you could question the man Terry Bollea, but Hulk Hogan's wrestling legacy, what he meant to the entertainment business of pro wrestling, the red and yellow, the yellow and red, the black and white persona of Hollywood Hulk Hogan. What he did for professional wrestling will never be forgotten. Whether it was red and yellow, Hulkamania red and yellow, or the NWO black and white. Hulkamania will always live forever. For life, brother. Hulk Hogan's legacy as a wrestler, as a sports entertainer, will never be forgotten. His personal life was always one of mystery and question. But you will never ever forget the Hulkamania red and yellow or the NWO black and white. The training, saying your prayers, eating your vitamins, being a good person. Those are the things that Hulk Hogan stood for. Maybe not Terry Bollea, but what Hulk Hogan stood for. It didn't matter. Hulk Hogan really, if you look at wrestling childhood, impacted in the 80s, the 90s, whether it was Hulkamania yellow and red or NWO black and white, Hulk Hogan was part of your wrestling childhood if you watch professional wrestling. He impacted so many and continues to be the inspiration for many. The Make-A-Wish, you see John Cena today. Hulk Hogan played a big part of that. You see the success of WrestleMania. Hulk Hogan played, along with Vince McMahon, played a big part of that. You see WCW's successes, especially in the late 90s, from 94 to the demise. Hulk Hogan played a part of that, both in its success and its downfall. Did he have his controversies in wrestling? Yeah. The creative control clause, not putting over younger wrestlers, holding younger wrestlers back. But there was no doubt the impacts Hulk Hogan had in professional wrestling will be forever. It will be legendary. He's in the WWE Hall of Fame in both 2005, both for his red and yellow, and in 2019 for his black and white. Hulk Hogan will never be forgotten. It didn't matter if you were Hulkamania red or yellow or NWO black and white. Hulkamania will live forever, for life, brother. All right, just take care, History Now fans. Hope to see you soon. Take care, brother.